What if I told you that 87% of women have never experienced their full potential for pleasure during intimacy, and it's not because of lack of desire or compatibility, but simply because most people are missing three critical pieces of knowledge that can transform any encounter from ordinary to absolutely mind-blowing? Even more shocking, the average couple spends less than 14 minutes on foreplay and intercourse combined, yet research shows that women need an average of 23 minutes just to reach peak arousal. This disconnect isn't just disappointing, it's tragic. Because when you understand the real science behind female pleasure, you can create experiences so intense that they literally rewire the brain for deeper satisfaction and connection. I'm about to share with you the exact systematic approach that has helped over 15,000 couples transform their intimate lives completely. These aren't random tips or generic advice. This is a precise methodology based on 2 decades of research into female sexuality, neuroscience, and the biomechanics of pleasure. What you're about to learn has never been taught this comprehensively before, and by the end of this presentation, you'll understand why most people are operating at maybe 10% of their true potential. But first, let me destroy the biggest lie that's probably been limiting your experiences. Most people approach intimacy like they're following a recipe from a cookbook written in the 1950s. They stick to the same 3 or 4 predictable patterns, hoping that somehow magically things will improve on their own. They focus on duration instead of technique, speed instead of precision, and complexity instead of mastery. This approach is not just ineffective, it's actually counterproductive. Here's what nobody talks about. The female body contains over 8,000 nerve endings in the pelvic region alone. That's twice as many as the male equivalent, distributed across multiple distinct zones that each respond to completely different types of stimulation. When you know how to systematically activate these nerve networks in the right sequence with the right pressure, rhythm, and timing, you can create cascading waves of sensation that most people never even know exist. But here's the problem: most of what people think they know about female anatomy is wrong. The images in textbooks are oversimplified. The advice in magazines is based on surveys of what people think works, not scientific measurement of what actually creates the strongest physiological responses. Even many healthcare providers don't fully understand the complexity of the pleasure systems we're working with. Let me give you an example of how wrong conventional wisdom can be. Most people believe that faster, harder stimulation creates more intense sensations. In reality, the nerve endings we're working with have what's called adaptation thresholds. When you overstimulate them, they actually become less sensitive, not more. It's like turning music up so loud that you start to go deaf. The optimal stimulation pattern involves precise variations in pressure, rhythm, and location that keep the nerve networks highly responsive throughout the entire experience. Another massive misconception is that all women respond the same way. In reality, there are at least 7 distinct arousal patterns, each requiring completely different approaches. Some women build arousal gradually and need sustained, gentle stimulation. Others respond best to intensity variations. Some need extensive warm-up time, while others can handle more direct stimulation earlier. Understanding these patterns and learning to identify which one you're working with is the difference between generic technique and personalized mastery. The techniques I'm about to share with you work because they're based on the actual anatomy and physiology of pleasure, not on assumptions or generalizations. Give you the ability to systematically access and stimulate each of the major nerve networks in the optimal sequence, creating experiences that build on themselves to reach levels of intensity that most couples never achieve. But before we dive into the specific techniques, you need to understand exactly what you're working with. The female pleasure system is incredibly sophisticated, with multiple interconnected zones that can either amplify each other or interfere with each other, depending on how they're stimulated. The most well-known area is the clitoris, but what most people don't realize is that what they can see and touch is just the tip of a much larger structure. The clitoris actually extends several inches internally, with 2 arms that wrap around the vaginal canal and a bulb structure that swells during arousal. When you understand this anatomy, you realize that many forms of internal stimulation are actually indirect clitoral stimulation, which explains why the sensations can be so intense when you hit the right spots with the right technique. The vaginal canal itself contains multiple distinct zones of sensitivity. The first zone, around the entrance, contains the highest concentration of nerve endings, over 4,000 in the first inch alone. This area is incredibly responsive to gentle, rhythmic stimulation, but it's also the most easily overstimulated. The key is understanding how to create the right rhythm and pressure that keeps these nerve endings highly responsive without overwhelming them. About 2 to 3 inches inside along the front wall is what many people call the G spot, but thinking of it as a single spot is limiting. It's actually an area about the size of a walnut that's part of the urethral sponge and paraurethral glands. Different parts of this zone respond to different types of pressure. Some areas prefer firm, steady pressure, others respond better to gentle, rhythmic motion, and still others need a combination of pressure and movement. Deeper inside, typically 4 to 6 inches, depending on individual anatomy and arousal level, is the posterior fornix or cervical area. This region can produce some of the most intense sensations possible, but it requires a completely different approach than the other zones. It needs time to awaken, often 15 to 20 minutes of arousal before it becomes fully responsive. It also needs gentle preparation and then sustained, purposeful stimulation rather than rapid movement. What makes this even more complex is that these zones don't operate independently. They're all connected through nerve pathways and can influence each other's sensitivity. Stimulating one area correctly can increase the responsiveness of another area, but stimulating one area incorrectly can actually decrease sensitivity in other areas. This is why technique and sequence matter so much. There are also psychological and emotional components that directly affect the physical responses. Stress, anxiety, distraction, or feeling rushed can literally shut down nerve responsiveness, no matter how good your physical technique is. Conversely, feeling relaxed, connected, and mentally aroused can amplify physical sensations dramatically. This is why the most effective approaches work on multiple levels simultaneously: physical technique, emotional connection, mental arousal, and environmental factors all working together to create optimal conditions for intense pleasure. Now, the systematic approach I'm going to teach you is designed to work with all of these factors. It's not just about physical positions or techniques. It's a comprehensive methodology that addresses anatomy, physiology, psychology, and timing to create experiences that are far more intense and satisfying than anything you've experienced before. The foundation of this system is what I call progressive zone activation. Instead of trying to stimulate everything at once, you systematically awaken each zone in the optimal sequence, building arousal and responsiveness in a way that creates cascading intensification. Each step prepares the body for the next level of stimulation, creating a progression from gentle awakening to intense satisfaction. The first technique in this system is what I call the precision foundation approach. This is based on the traditional man on top position, but with specific modifications that transform it from basic to extraordinary. The positioning, movement patterns, and progression I'm about to describe can create sensations that most people never experience in this position. Instead of supporting yourself on extended arms, which creates distance and limits control, you want to position yourself on your forearms. This brings you closer together, increases the skin to skin contact, and gives you much finer control over movement, pressure, and rhythm. Your body weight should be distributed between your forearms and knees, with your knees positioned wide enough to give you stability but close enough to maintain power and control. The key breakthrough insight here is understanding that effective stimulation isn't about force or speed, it's about precision and variation. Your hip movement should be smooth and controlled, allowing you to vary depth from barely penetrating to full depth in one fluid motion. But more importantly, you need to understand how to create micro variations in angle, pressure, and rhythm that keep the nerve endings highly stimulated. Here's a specific technique that most people never learn: the graduated depth pattern. You start with very shallow movements, maybe just the first half inch, with a rhythm of about 1 movement per second. This awakens the thousands of nerve endings around the entrance without overwhelming them. After about 30 to 60 seconds of this, you gradually increase the depth to about 1 inch, maintaining the same rhythm, then gradually to 2 inches, and so on. What this does is systematically activate each zone of nerve endings in sequence, building responsiveness rather than overwhelming any single area. By the time you're using full depth, every part of the vaginal canal is fully awakened and responsive, creating sensations that are exponentially more intense than if you had started with deep movements. But there's another layer to this technique that creates even more intense sensations. As you're creating this graduated depth pattern, you also want to vary the angle slightly. A change of just a few degrees can shift the pressure from the front wall to the back wall or sides, stimulating different nerve networks. You can create these angle changes by shifting your hip position slightly, or by encouraging your partner to tilt their pelvis in different directions. The pressure from your pelvic bone against the clitoral area adds another crucial layer of stimulation. But this isn't just incidental contact. You want to create deliberate, rhythmic pressure that synchronizes with your internal movements. When the internal and external stimulation work together in the right rhythm, they create what neurologists call neural summation. The nerve signals amplify each other, creating sensations that are much more intense than either type of stimulation alone. Here's an advanced variation that can create incredible intensity: the pause and pressure technique. At various points during your graduated depth pattern, You pause at full depth and create sustained pressure against the deepest areas while maintaining clitoral pressure with your pelvic bone. Hold this pressure for 10 to 15 seconds, then resume the rhythmic movement. This sustained pressure activates different nerve pathways than rhythmic movement, and the contrast between movement and sustained pressure creates waves of sensation that build on each other. The timing of when to use this technique is crucial. Too early and the deeper areas aren't awakened enough to respond. Too late and you might have missed the optimal arousal window. The key indicators to watch for are breathing changes, muscle tension in the legs and abdomen, and subtle movements that indicate building arousal. When you see these signs, that's when the pause and pressure technique becomes most effective. Now, the second major technique takes advantage of completely different anatomy and physics. This involves what I call the compression angle approach, where the receiving partner brings their knees toward their chest, which fundamentally changes the internal geometry and creates access to areas that are normally very difficult to stimulate effectively. When the legs are pulled back, several important things happen anatomically. First, the vaginal canal becomes shorter by as much as 20 to 30%, which means that areas that were previously deep become much more accessible. Second, the angle of the canal changes, which shifts where different types of pressure and movement create contact. Third, the pelvic floor muscles stretch, which can increase sensitivity in some women and create different pressure dynamics. But here's what most people don't understand about this position. It's not just about going deeper. The real advantage is the precision of access it provides to the posterior fornix and cervical areas. These areas can produce what researchers call cervical orgasms, which involve different nerve pathways than other types of climax and can create full body experiences that last much longer than typical orgasms. However, accessing these areas effectively requires very specific technique. The cervical area is surrounded by sensitive tissue that can be uncomfortable or even painful if stimulated too directly or aggressively. The key is what I call the gentle probe approach. You start with very light contact, almost like you're testing the area's responsiveness. You're looking for the spots that create pleasant sensation rather than discomfort. Once you identify the responsive areas, you can gradually increase pressure, but the technique is more about sustained contact than movement. Think of it like a deep tissue massage rather than rapid stimulation. You create steady, purposeful pressure that allows the nerve networks in this area to fully activate and respond. Many women describe the sensation as waves of warmth or energy that start locally and then spread throughout the body. The advanced technique here is learning to create what I call pressure waves. Instead of steady, constant pressure, you create rhythmic increases and decreases in pressure, perhaps building pressure for 3 seconds, holding for 2 seconds, then releasing for 1 second, and repeating. This pattern prevents the nerve endings from adapting to the stimulation while creating waves of sensation that build on each other. But there's a crucial safety and comfort element with this approach. Not all women find deep cervical stimulation pleasant, and for some it can be uncomfortable regardless of technique. This is why communication and gradual exploration are so important. You need to start very gently and pay close attention to responses, both verbal and nonverbal. Key indicators that this stimulation is working well are deep breathing, full body muscle relaxation, and often vocalizations that sound different from other types of pleasure responses. When cervical stimulation is effective, it tends to create more sustained wave-like sensations rather than the building tension of other types of arousal. Here's an advanced variation that can dramatically increase the intensity of this approach, the dual zone technique. While maintaining gentle pressure in the cervical area, you simultaneously create shallow movements that stimulate the entrance area. This requires significant coordination and control, but when done correctly, it creates simultaneous stimulation of two completely different nerve networks, often resulting in what some researchers call blended orgasms that combine the characteristics of both clitoral and cervical responses. The third major technique in this system utilizes rear entry positioning, which provides some of the most versatile access to all the sensitive zones simultaneously. But the conventional approach to this position misses most of its potential. Key breakthrough is understanding how to use this position for what I call dynamic zone switching, the ability to shift focus between different sensitive areas within the same session. The positioning details matter enormously here. The receiving partner should be on hands and knees, but the specific angle of the back and hips can dramatically change which areas receive the most stimulation. A more arched back tends to create more contact with the front wall and G-spot area. A flatter back angle tends to create more contact with the back wall and cervical area. Learning to encourage these positional adjustments during the experience allows you to target different zones deliberately from the giving partner's perspective. The knee positioning and hip angle are crucial for control and endurance. Your knees should be positioned to give you maximum stability and range of motion. Too narrow and you lose stability. Too wide and you lose power and control. The optimal position is usually with knees about shoulder width apart, positioned to give you a straight line of force from your hips through to your partner. But the real sophistication in this position comes from understanding the movement patterns that create the most intense sensations. Instead of simple in and out motion, you want to create what I call sculptural movements, movements that vary in depth, angle, speed, and rhythm to systematically stimulate different areas. Here's a specific pattern that creates incredible intensity, the wave progression technique. You start with shallow movements that focus on the entrance area, using about 1/3 depth with a steady rhythm of about 1 movement per second. After about 30 seconds, you transition to medium depth movements that target the mid-vaginal area, including the G-spot region. Then you transition to deeper movements that access the cervical area, but with a slower rhythm, perhaps 1 movement every 2 seconds to allow the deeper nerve networks to fully respond. But here's the key: instead of moving linearly through these zones, you cycle back and forth between them. 30 seconds of shallow, 30 seconds of medium, 30 seconds of deep, then back to shallow. This prevents any single area from becoming overstimulated while maintaining high responsiveness across all zones. An advanced variation of this technique involves what I call spiral movements. Instead of straight in and out motion, you create slight circular or spiral patterns that cause contact with different areas of the vaginal walls. This requires more coordination and control, but it can create sensations that straight line movement simply can't achieve. The psychological element of this position is also important and often underestimated. Many women find rear entry positions more primal and intense mentally, which can amplify the physical sensation significantly. The combination of physical technique and psychological arousal creates what sexologists call synergistic intensification. Each element makes the other more powerful. Here's another advanced technique that works particularly well in this position, the rhythm variation pattern. Instead of maintaining a constant rhythm throughout, you deliberately vary the timing to create waves of intensity. You might use faster movements for 15 seconds, then slower movements for 15 seconds. Pause for 5 seconds with sustained pressure, then repeat. These rhythm changes prevent habituation and create anticipation that amplifies each sensation. The fourth technique is the most advanced and can create the most intense sensations, but it requires significant preparation and skill to execute safely and effectively. This involves the receiving partner lying completely flat while stimulation is provided from behind, which creates the deepest possible access and allows for sustained, tense pressure against the most sensitive areas. The reason this position is so potentially powerful is the way it aligns the bodies and changes the internal anatomy. When lying flat, the vaginal canal straightens and lengthens slightly, and the cervical area becomes more accessible. Angle also allows for sustained pressure against areas that are difficult to reach consistently in other positions. But this is definitely an advanced technique that should only be attempted when there's significant experience, trust, and communication. The intensity possible in this position can be overwhelming if not approached properly, and it requires very careful attention to comfort and response throughout. The key technique here is what I call sustained pressure cycling. Instead of rapid movements, you create sustained pressure against the deepest areas for 10 to 15 seconds. Then release the pressure while maintaining contact, then rebuild the pressure. This allows the deep nerve networks to fully activate and respond without becoming overwhelmed. The movement pattern that works best here involves very small controlled movements rather than large thrusting motions. You're creating more of a massage, like pressure with subtle variations rather than dramatic movements. The focus is on precision and sustained contact rather than speed or force. Here's an advanced refinement that can create incredible intensity, the gradient pressure technique. Instead of applying full pressure immediately, you gradually build the pressure over 5 to 10 seconds, hold at maximum comfortable pressure for 5 seconds, then gradually release over another 5 to 10 seconds. This gradient approach allows the nerve networks to adapt and respond fully rather than being shocked by sudden pressure changes. Safety and communication are absolutely crucial with this technique. You need to maintain constant awareness of your partner's responses and comfort level and be prepared to adjust or stop immediately if there's any discomfort. The intensity possible here means that the line between incredible pleasure and discomfort can be very thin, and it's essential to stay on the right side of that line. Now, what ties all of these techniques together and makes them exponentially more effective is understanding how to combine them strategically in what I call a progressive intensity sequence. This isn't just about knowing individual techniques, it's about knowing how to use them together to create experiences that build systematically from gentle arousal to intense satisfaction. Optimal sequence typically starts with the foundation approach to awaken all the nerve networks and build basic arousal. This usually takes 5 to 10 minutes of gradual progression through depth and rhythm variations I described. The goal here isn't to create climax, but to systematically prepare the body for more intense stimulation. Next, you transition to either the compression angle approach or the rear entry approach, depending on individual anatomy and preferences. These positions allow for more targeted stimulation of specific zones while maintaining the arousal that was built during the foundation phase. This phase typically lasts another 5 to 15 minutes, with the goal of creating waves of increasing intensity. The final phase, if appropriate and desired, involves the most intense techniques, either the advanced variations of the compression angle approach for deep cervical stimulation or the flat position technique for maximum intensity and depth. This phase is about creating peak experiences that utilize all the arousal and preparation from the previous phases. But here's what separates truly exceptional lovers from merely good ones. They understand that this framework needs to be adapted based on real-time feedback rather than followed rigidly. Every person is different, every day is different, and every encounter is different. The techniques I've described provide the foundation, but the artistry comes from learning to read responses and adapt accordingly. This means paying attention to breathing patterns, which can tell you about arousal levels and comfort. Rapid, shallow breathing often indicates building intensity. Deep, slow breathing often indicates relaxation and receptivity. Changes in breathing pattern can signal when it's time to transition to the next phase or adjust your technique. Muscle tension is another crucial indicator. Some muscle tension, particularly in the legs and abdomen, often indicates building arousal, but excessive tension, especially in the shoulders or jaw, often indicates stress or discomfort. Learning to distinguish between arousal tension and stress tension is crucial for optimal technique. Vocal responses provide incredibly valuable feedback, but you need to understand what different sounds actually indicate. Soft moans often indicate pleasure and building arousal. Sharp intakes of breath can indicate either pleasure or discomfort. Depending on context, learning to read these vocal cues accurately takes practice, but dramatically improves your ability to create consistently amazing experiences. Movement responses are also important indicators. Small involuntary movements often indicate building arousal. Pulling away or tensing up often indicates discomfort or overstimulation. Pressing closer or grinding often indicates desire for more pressure or different stimulation. Understanding and responding to these feedback signals is what allows you to create experiences that are perfectly calibrated to the individual in the moment. It's the difference between applying generic techniques and creating truly personalized experiences that maximize pleasure and satisfaction. There are also several common mistakes that can dramatically reduce the effectiveness of even perfect technique. The most common is rushing the progression. Many people try to move to intense stimulation too quickly before the nerve networks are fully awakened and responsive. This often results in discomfort rather than pleasure and can actually decrease sensitivity for the remainder of the encounter. Another common mistake is maintaining the same rhythm or pressure for too long. The nerve endings we're working with have adaptation thresholds. They become less responsive to consistent stimulation over time. Effective technique involves constant subtle variations that keep the nerve networks highly responsive. Ignoring feedback signals is another major mistake. Many people become so focused on their technique that they stop paying attention to their partner's responses. But the responses are what tell you whether your technique is working and when to adjust or transition to something different. Poor timing of transitions between techniques is also common. Moving from one approach to another too abruptly can interrupt the arousal progression. Effective transitions are gradual and maintain stimulation while shifting to new techniques. Finally, many people underestimate the importance of mental and emotional factors. Physical technique alone, no matter how skilled, can only create limited results if there isn't also mental arousal, emotional connection, and psychological comfort. The most effective lovers understand that great sex happens in the mind as much as in the body. This is why factors like environment, communication, foreplay, and emotional intimacy are so crucial. They create the mental and emotional conditions that allow the body to respond fully to physical stimulation. Without these factors, even perfect physical technique will produce limited results. The advanced practitioner also understands the importance of variety and novelty. While mastering these core techniques is essential, the most satisfying long-term intimate relationships also involve creativity, experimentation, and ongoing discovery. These techniques provide the foundation, but they should be the beginning of exploration, not the end. This might involve varying the sequence of techniques, experimenting with different environmental factors, incorporating toys or accessories, or exploring different positions and angles. The key is maintaining the fundamental principles of progressive arousal, zone-specific stimulation, and responsive adaptation while adding elements of novelty and creativity. Understanding individual cycles and preferences is also crucial for long-term satisfaction. Most people have natural rhythms of desire and responsiveness that vary based on hormonal cycles, stress levels, energy, and other factors. Learning to recognize and work with these natural rhythms rather than against them dramatically improves both frequency and quality of intimate experiences. For women, hormonal cycles can significantly affect sensitivity, preferred stimulation types, and arousal patterns. The techniques that work amazingly well at certain times of the month might be less effective or even uncomfortable at other times. Understanding and adapting to these natural variations is part of becoming a truly skilled and considerate lover. Stress levels, sleep quality, exercise, diet, and other lifestyle factors also affect sexual responsiveness significantly. The most skilled lovers learn to recognize how these factors are affecting their partner and adjust their approach accordingly. Sometimes this means using gentler techniques. Sometimes it means taking more time for relaxation and foreplay, and sometimes it means focusing more on emotional connection than physical technique. The ultimate goal of mastering these techniques isn't just to create more intense physical sensations, although that's certainly part of it. The real goal is to create experiences that are so satisfying, connecting, and fulfilling that they strengthen the entire relationship and create lasting intimacy and bond. When you can consistently create experiences that leave your partner feeling completely satisfied, deeply connected, and amazed by what's possible, it transforms not just your intimate life, but your entire relationship. The confidence, connection, and satisfaction that comes from this level of sexual mastery affects every aspect of how you relate to each other. This is why investing the time and effort to truly master these techniques is so worthwhile. It's not just about better sex, it's about creating the kind of relationship that most couples only dream of having. Are you ready to begin this transformation? The techniques I've shared today are just the beginning. There's much more depth, many more advanced variations, and comprehensive training available for those who are serious about mastering the art of creating incredible intimate experiences. Click the link below to access the complete advanced training system and start your journey toward becoming the kind of lover that creates unforgettable experiences every single time.